Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our channels and looking at these responses to the debate that we did on Trinity Radio. Steve and I, we took the thesis that our souls remain conscious in Sheol, and our debate opponents, Chris Date and James Harding, took the thesis that basically Christian physicalism, that when we die, there's nothing, there's no consciousness. And so we have been doing a series of responses to this debate. If you maybe haven't checked out any of those, you might want to go back and look at those. But what we're specifically going to talk about here is the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, because we believe that it teaches our view. And so we want to look at that today and tell you why we think it explicitly teaches that there's consciousness in the afterlife. Steve, do you have anything you want to say before we get started?
Yeah, I would just like to say that actually I'll wait till you read the parable.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's get that pulled up here in just a second. And we'll just read the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, and then we're going to talk about what it's teaching and what we think the implications of this verse are. So here we go. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. That's a SAT word right there, sumptuously. All right. And at the gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you is a great chasm that has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not hear Moses or the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. So do you have any thoughts on this passage before I take it off the stage? Anything you want to point out or highlight?
Well, I just want to point out that the two of us agree with Chris and James that this is a parable, and that parables should not by themselves be interpreted literally. However, I would like to go back to the rules of interpretation that I use in my book. Can you pull that up?
Yeah, absolutely.
On a share screen.
So let me remove this, and then I'll add yours. There we go.
All right. So these are the 10 rules I use in my book for interpreting. So this is my hermeneutical standard. So basically, this is a way of holding myself accountable. And it's a way that all of us can hold ourselves accountable. So it's instead of reading a verse and trying to interpret it or try to make it fit with our own theological view, we interpret it through this hermeneutical standard because it's unbiased. It's not going to start with someone's interpretation, start with someone's, presuppositions. So it eliminates the subjectivity, and that's the point. And so this is a standard that I use across the board. Okay, so since the parable of the rich man and Lazarus is a parable, that means it requires an interpretation, and that interpretation has to come from God. And this is part of Rule 3. So Rule 3 dictates that prophetic dreams and visions in the Bible must be interpreted through the didactic teachings within the Gospels and Epistles. Now I go on later to explain that includes poetry, poems, and wisdom literature. And so then in Rule 4, we have dreams and visions can be interpreted as literal if the same concept is taught within a didactic teaching. And so what this means is if the idea of the intermediate state is taught elsewhere, besides the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, we can then use that and like determine that the parable of the rich man and Lazarus is literally describing what the intermediate state is like. You know, maybe not to like 100% degree, but the idea of there being two distinct places within Hades or Sheol, where the righteous are in God's presence and the unrighteous are being punished. That's the idea. And so
I think I just wanted to hop in here. I think this is important because what this does is it removes the subjectivity, because we've been contending in all of our responses that Chris and James, you guys have these interpretations of Ecclesiastes chapter 9, of Psalm 6, et cetera, and you guys read other verses in light of those. But what we're doing here is we are trying to remove that subjectivity, because if you're wrong about Ecclesiastes 9, as we think you are, in Psalm chapter 6, et cetera, then you're reading all these other verses incorrectly, and that's a problem. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to remove the subjectivity as much as we can. We're trying to take this hermeneutic and say, okay, if there's a didactic teaching that teaches our view, and then there's a parable that lines up with it, then because the interpretation is elsewhere, we can then read this parable literally. So some people might say, oh, you're reading a parable literally. We're telling you why we're able to do so. It's because we think it's taught elsewhere that the consciousness is in the intermediate state, and this is just another example of that being the case.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, and during the debate, they said that they don't interpret Jesus's teachings in the epistles through wisdom, literature, and poetry. Okay, so if that's true, then you could take away Ecclesiastes, you could take away Psalms and all the others, and then you can build your case without them. And I don't think they can. I don't think they can build their case, make a positive case that there is no consciousness after we die, without using those as their foundation. And so
I agree with that. We're making our case from elsewhere in didactic teachings, and then we're reading those in light of that. But if you were to remove those two verses from the Bible and say, can you make your case from like the New Testament, or can you make your case from the teachings of Jesus, or can you make your case from the teachings of the apostles? We don't think you can. And that's basically our challenge here, is like, because that's what we're doing, and we want to see if our opponents could do the same.
Yeah, they're starting with their interpretations of Ecclesiastes 9:5. Like that, they've made it clear that they believe those are literal, intended to be literal. And so they're starting with that. And, you know, they've also affirmed that if the New Testament teaches something opposite of what's their interpretation of Ecclesiastes 9:5 and these others, then there's a contradiction. And that's what we're saying also, is we agree that if you read them both literally, there is a contradiction. And so where do we draw the line of which one is literal and which one it needs to be interpreted through what we determine is literal? And so with the rules, this isn't something I use for just the intermediate state. Like, this is everything. Like, you can use it for annihilationism, for you know, which view of the millennial reign is true for anything, even soteriology. And so that's the idea. These rules, it's not like they're good for a certain doctrine and they're a mess whenever else, because like Nathan said, that the point is to eliminate subjectivity. Okay, so the literal verses that we use to interpret this literally is, as we demonstrated in a previous video about the comma in Luke 23:43. If Jesus was with the thief that day, once they were crucified, once they died, if they were in paradise that day, that means they were conscious that day. And so earlier, Jesus told the Pharisees that he would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And so if he's going to be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, and also in paradise, that requires paradise to be in the heart of the earth. And so then you also have Paul saying, you know, to be away from the body is to be at home with the Lord. So that's 2 Corinthians 5:8, Philippians 1:23. So these are in the context of didactic teachings. And then so then you also have 1 Thessalonians 5:10, where he says we're alive with Christ, whether we're asleep or whether awake. And then in 1 Thessalonians 5:23, he makes a distinction between body, soul, and spirit. Now, if Paul had abandoned his Pharisaical understanding of there being a distinction between body and soul, it'd be very strange for him to say what he did in 1 Thessalonians 5:10 and then follow it with 1 Thessalonians 5:23. And so these are the issues. So like we read these as if Paul correctly, he didn't gaffe, like he didn't just make some mistake, like, oh yeah, I should have probably worded that a little bit better. It sounds like I was affirming my old views. I think he was intentionally affirming his old views, like he made no effort on correcting them. Okay, so
I'll say too, real quick.
What's that?
To hop in there really fast, there's a book by E. Randolph Richards. He's a great scholar. It's called Paul in First Century Letter Writing. He goes into detail about how Paul's letters were likely constructed, and it was a very thorough process. I mean, they had scribes, they probably had multiple resources open and in front of them, because writing a letter was not a cheap thing. It'd be like, for example, I think he said the book of Romans would have probably cost about $2,000 today to have composed. So it's like, imagine paying $2,000 to have a letter written, right? It's like, that's a lot of money. You're not going to, especially back then, that would have been, it's probably close to what, like $10,000-$15,000 now in our money. So it's very expensive. And so, Paul, he wasn't taking these things lightly. So pretty much every word in these letters is intentional. And so I would agree with you. I just want to point that out. Like, there's not going to be any gaffes in the letters, because it wasn't something cheap. They're taking this seriously.
Yeah. And that would be a very major error to, if you want people to stop believing what the Pharisees thought about a dualist nature of body and soul, like Paul did a terrible job at correcting that idea.
10,000-15,000 is probably wrong. So Randolph Richards wrote that book in like 2010, and he said it would be about $2,000 then. So I'm assuming with inflation, it'd probably be closer to about 5,000. I was probably exaggerating a little bit, but still, $5,000 for a letter is not a cheap thing, right? So like, you're going to make sure that it is done well. So I just want to clear that up. If someone in the comments is like, hey, you said 10 to 15, that's too high. Like, okay, let's say 5. So, but yeah, still expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's get into it here.
All right.
So not only do we read do those verses I just referenced from like Luke 23:43 and the verses by Paul, so those are in didactic teaching. So we use those teachings to interpret the parable of the rich man as a viable presentation of what the intermediate state is like, as well as Revelation 6:9-11. So if in Revelation 6:9-11, they're giving clothes, they're given white garments, like, so the idea is that Abraham and Lazarus, they would have been wearing those white garments in the parable. Let's see here. So and also in Acts 20, actually, can you pull that up? Acts 23:6-8.
All right, let's pull my Bible website back up. You said Acts what?
23:6-8.
Oh, whoops. 2:8. Okay. Let's make this a little bit bigger for the audience. All right. How's that?
Okay.
Yeah. I'll read it. Now, when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but Pharisees acknowledge them all.
Okay. So, nor spirit. So the idea is the Pharisees affirmed the spiritual realm, the Sadducees didn't.
Yeah.
And so that's it, in physicalism. That's what they're doing. They don't take it to the extreme as the Sadducees. Like I'm pretty sure Chris and James affirm that they're angels. And the funny thing is, I don't think they have a hard time comprehending that angels can't be seen in the unseen realm by each other, and they have fingers and hands and clothes, and so it's just you know follow that logic. If they're in the unseen realm, but within that realm, that dimension, those within that realm can see each other. Us in this realm can't see them, but those in that realm can. It's the same thing. If angels can do it, then if God is powerful to make this realm where angels, unseen beings, creatures, can see themselves, then I don't think it should take too much of a stretch to think that God can also make a realm where disembodied souls can see and be seen, and experience life, or experience existence, consciousness.
Now, I do want to point out too, because Chris normally with this word spirit, that is the word pneuma in Greek, and he wants to normally make that the breath. So he thinks like pneuma is our breath, which allows us to be alive. But I think what's interesting here is I don't think the Sadducees would have rejected that humans have breath in their body, right? So I think it's talking about a spiritual realm. I'm just trying to anticipate an objection from Chris here, because I know that he reads that word pneuma a specific way.
Yeah. So he has to make whatever way he interprets it, he has to make sure it's a way that the Sadducees would reject. Because if he interprets it a way that they would accept, then he's not interpreting it correctly. So that's a very good point. Okay, so now let's actually get into the parable here.
Okay, go back to Luke 16.
Let's see.
I'll make it a little bit smaller because it's a big parable. How about that? Or a little bit smaller again. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so Lazarus is described to have been immediately carried to Abraham's side once he died. This just so happens to perfectly parallel Abraham's own death as described in Genesis 25, 8 through 9.
Let's see. I'm trying to find where it says. Moreover, the dog's poor man died and was carried to Abraham's side. Yeah, here we go. The poor man was carried and laid to his side. So he was carried to Abraham's side, and what's interesting is in the debate we mentioned a near death or a deathbed encounter as well, and this was pretty interesting too, because there was one part that I read that I didn't mention this part, but it's very interesting in the account that you can read in Lee Strobel's recent book, Seeing the Supernatural. There's this woman, basically she was on her deathbed, and she out of nowhere had a vision in the corner of the room where she saw angels coming to get her, basically. And then she said that her father was with them. And then she said that her sister was with them. And she actually didn't know that her sister had died. And so she had a experience of her sister, who had recently passed away, coming to take her to Abraham's side, basically. So I find this very interesting that in this parable, the angels are like taking him to Abraham's side, because it says right here, carried by the angels to Abraham's side. But then in this deathbed encounter, angels are literally coming to get this woman and then she died right after that. So, just very interesting that, again, we can read some of these things literally if the interpretation is elsewhere.
Yeah. So in Genesis 25, 8 to 9, it reads, Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Then Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpeth in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, east of Mamre. Okay, so we have Abraham being gathered to his people. So that's end of the sentence. Then the beginning of the next sentence, Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him. So he was gathered to his people, then he was buried. So those are two distinct things. And it just so happens that's exactly what we have in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. We have,
I just wanted to see this. So he was gathered to his people, and then in the next verse, he's taken and buried in this cave.
Yeah.
So now let's go back to the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. So the poor man, he dies. He was carried to the angel's side, and then the rich man died and was buried.
Yeah. So that would mean that immediately after Abraham breathed his last, he was gathered to his people. And God promised Abraham in Genesis 15:15 that he would be gathered to his fathers in peace. Now some people, they would say, those who believe in soul sleep, they would say, oh, being gathered to your people or gathered to the fathers, that's a metaphor for being buried with them. But the thing was, Abraham was not buried with his fathers. He was not buried with his people. He bought a cave among the Hittites, and Sarah, the only person who was buried there was Sarah. And so when God promised him that he would go to his fathers at a good old age, like that wouldn't be the only promise that was really kept was that he would die at a good old age. So that was kept, that he wasn't gathered to his fathers because his fathers were buried somewhere else. So if we're taking a physicalist approach with Genesis 15:15, God only kept part of the promise. And so with our view, in the dualist view, he was gathered with his fathers in a literal sense also, in the same way that Lazarus was gathered to his father Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that's the connection Jesus was making, because that's what all the Israelites would claim. We're of our father Abraham. And so if you're with Abraham in the intermediate state, it's to say that this is that's your father Abraham.
So, Steve, I have a question. I'm just trying to anticipate some objections here. Maybe someone might say, well, Saul was gathered to his people whenever he died, and so maybe some wicked people are gathered to their people as well. So, how would our view kind of account for that? Just want to make sure there's no way out for our opponents here.
Yeah. Well, even in Jesus's parable, the rich man called Abraham father. That's let's see here.
Right here, Father
that's
Abraham.
in verse 27.
Have mercy on me, yeah.
Or yeah. And so so you have the rich man calling him father. And so I believe the distinction is in Genesis 15:15, it said Abraham would be gathered to his fathers in peace.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is behind that is, if you're righteous, you'll go in peace. You'll be in a place of peace once you die. But if you're not righteous, then there is no peace. There is no rest. So there's no rest for the wicked.
I'm
I was
in
wanting to
anguish
go
in this flame, he says.
Yeah.
He's in anguish, so there's no rest for him.
Yes. And so this term is constantly used throughout the Old Testament, especially in the context of the unrighteous, even after they die. But anguish, distress, same words that Jesus uses in this parable.
Also, I'm thinking, this just kind of came to my head. So maybe this could be wrong as well, but just throwing it out there. People are called, like in First John, it says that like Satan is the father of the people who are wicked. So I mean, even if wicked people are gathered to their father, it could be that they're gathered to Satan, and his people, like, because they're the seed of the serpent, right? So Jesus calls them, like, you are of your father, the devil, right? When he's talking to the Pharisees. So like, it's possible that this phrase has a positive and negative connotation based on that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, I can see that. I wish we could go into more detail on that, the whole anguish and distress and all that, and peace. But
so the point here is that burial and being gathered to your father those are two distinct things. We have someone being buried, and then they're gathered to their father from the angels, and they're brought there. And we see this here in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. The angels bring the Lazarus to Abraham's side. And so that's the distinction we're trying to draw here. We've anticipated some objections, so now we think we can keep going.
Yeah. Okay, so the second reference is within the same verse, which is verse 22, and it continues on to verse 23. In these verses, Jesus affirms the dualist interpretation of Genesis 25, 8-9, by making a distinction of the rich man's body being buried while his soul goes to be in torment in Hades. So let's look at those verses again. So that's verses 22 and 23.
Yeah. It says the poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side.
Yep. So here we have Jesus explicitly making that distinction between the rich man. He died, was buried, and then so that's his body. He bodily died and was buried, and then is it his dead corpse that's in torment? Like, no, that's his disembodied soul. Like that again, that was Jesus's audience were the Pharisees. Like, this wouldn't be some weird thing. Like, they would have known exactly what that meant. They would have known that Jesus was making a distinction between the rich man's body being buried and his soul being in torment in Hades. Yep. So this is Jesus explicitly affirming dualism. We don't have Jesus explicitly even close to supporting monism or physicalism or soul sleep or anything. So it gets to a point. It's just like how much scripture does one need to again? So what we're doing is we used New Testament verses that were in didactic teachings to interpret this as literal, and then once we're reading this, we're like, oh well, we see Jesus is actually referring to Old Testament verses, and so it's the same approach that annihilationists use when proving annihilationism. It's like, oh, Jesus is he's calling back to some Old Testament verse. Let's read that for context, and then we go back to Old Testament verse, and we see like, oh yeah, this is affirming this view, and so in annihilation.
This verse is actually pertinent to that debate. A lot of ECT advocates take the rich man to be in hell, and they're saying, look, he's being tormented in hell, when in reality, this is just about the intermediate state.
Yes.
And so I think Chris and James, as annihilationists, they should want to agree with us on this parable, right? It's like this is referring to the intermediate state. However, since he is making this distinction between being buried and the soul being in Hades, I think we should also take that for what it says as well. Because I don't even know how they would interpret this passage. Like, is it for them like apocalyptic imagery or something of suffering? I don't even know how they would interpret this.
Well, it's just basically a fictional story. Like Chris compares it to him quoting or referencing Lord of the Rings, but the difference is that this wasn't something that his audience believed was fictional. Like, his audience believed this was the reality of the world that God created. And so this is a doctrinal issue and not entertainment,
Yeah. To go back to your thought experiment from last week, you said if I were teaching a bunch of Hindus about resurrection, but I used the language of reincarnation, that would be a problem, right? If I didn't correct it and I taught reincarnation in the way that they believed it, and was like, yeah, you're going to be reincarnated and like it's going to be this new life, but it won't be here on earth, but it'll be just a new life somewhere else, like they would be like, okay, yeah, reincarnation, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a continued existence. It's going to be me in the afterlife. It's not going to be some other person or something or animal, because they even believe reincarnation, you can reincarnate as an animal on their view. So like it's going to be me, and so for Jesus to do something akin to that here, where he's like drawing a strict distinction and not correcting it, it would be a problem. Like you would expect him to somewhere correct, like, hey, by the way, this is just imagery or something, because his audience would believe this, and so it would be pastorally sloppy to use this language and not correct it.
Yeah. Be like if the Pharisees believed that they would reincarnate as cows, and they had a parable where someone reincarnated as a cow. Like, it's just like, no, like Jesus wouldn't do that. That would I think everyone would agree if Jesus had a parable where someone reincarnated as a cow, that would be very theologically problematic. I don't think Jesus isn't going to teach anything that's theologically problematic.
But that's essentially what Chris and James's view would have us believe Jesus is doing with this. Like, there's a clearly disembodied existence in Hades being depicted here. And if physicalism is true, Christian physicalism, then that's not possible. And so he's using language of a false doctrine. And he doesn't correct it whatsoever. So, and gives no indication that he doesn't believe it. And maybe they might want to say, oh, well, Luke is just recording pieces of teaching here. Jesus clarified it afterwards. Well, we have no evidence of that. And then again, we've also pointed to the followers of the apostles, the early church fathers. And we see as well with them, the way that they interpret these passages is they think that the dead go to paradise and they await the resurrection. This is what the early church viewed as the intermediate state. And so we think they're just following the teachings of Jesus. And so you basically have to say, oh, well, I don't know. It's almost like Jesus and the apostles led people astray because that's the view they walked away with parables like this.
Yep.
So.
All right. Yeah. So then the third example of Jesus referring to the Old Testament within this parable is within the very first verse within the parable that describes the intermediate state, which is verse 22. So by Jesus describing Lazarus to being joined by Abraham's side or Abraham's bosom, that's a way that people described eating at what was called a triclinium table when they would dine or feast. It's basically in this concept, it's like when John was laying on Jesus's side or in Jesus's bosom in John 13:23 while they're eating. Mm-hmm. And so this idea is, so you have this U-shaped table, that's a triclinium table. And so you lean on one arm and then you use the other hand to eat, and you kind of lean back by on the person behind you as kind of a backrest. And so that's you being in their bosom, so to speak. And so that's what Jesus is describing. So again, this is why understanding the culture and the audience and everything is so important, because without that, you're not going to know what Abraham's bosom means. Over time, people like that's the place of where they are. It's not a pronoun. It's just seeing where he is within the place. It's not Abraham. So I mean, if you want to call Abraham's bosom paradise and paradise Abraham's bosom, it's fine. But it just recognize that that's not how it was intended to be understood. Mm-hmm. It is the same that they're in the same place, but that's not the proper name for it. It's not Abraham's bosom.
They're not the same place. But Abraham's bosom is in paradise.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So in Psalm 23:4, King David described himself to be dining in the presence of his enemies within the valley of the shadow of death. It just so happens that God himself describes the gates of death being the same thing as the gates to the shadow of death in Job 38:17. Do you mind pulling that up? Job 38:17. Well, actually, Job 38:17 to 19. Okay. So actually in the King James Version.
Okay. Is there a reason we're going to this specifically?
Yeah. So because in the King James Version, it uses the phrase shadow of death. Most versions don't, even though it's the same word in Hebrew as Psalm 23:4. It's the same word. Yeah. So have the gates of death been opened unto thee, or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if thou knowest all. Where is the way where light dwelleth? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? And so what I believe what God is talking about, so this is God himself speaking to Job, describing the shadow of death. And I believe what he's saying here is within the shadow of death, you have the way to the light, and also the place of darkness. So there's within the shadow of death, you have light and darkness. And so the light, that would be where Abraham and Lazarus are. The darkness is where the rich man is. So it's the pit, it's the abyss, it's all these negative words that are associated with it throughout the entire Old Testament. And then we're not going to get into it all tonight, but like within the New Testament, for the light you have, or for the paradise side, you have light, day, peace, rest, comfort, hope. You have these phrases to allude to that place, the place there, the place within the shadow of death where the righteous go. And then
because we take on the fruit of the Spirit, right? We become like the God that we worship, and they become like their idols, like we've been talking about.
Yeah. And so can you also pull up Micah 7, 8-10?
Is there a specific translation for this one?
No, I don't think so.
We'll just go back to ESV then.
Okay.
All right. There we go.
Okay. I'll let you read it if you want to.
All right. Rejoice not over me, O my enemy. When I fall, I shall rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. I will bear the indignation of the Lord, because I have sinned against him, until he pleads my cause and executes judgment for me. He will bring me out to the light. I shall look upon his vindication. Then my enemy will see, and shame will cover her who has said to me, where is the Lord your God? My eyes will look upon her. Now she will be trampled down like the mire of the streets.
All right. So because of the way that most people today understand the intermediate state, verse 8 is usually interpreted or understood to mean, he's talking about when he falls short of the glory of God, when he sins, when he trespasses, he falls, he slips, like he falls short of the glory of God, but he's going to he'll come back from it. That's how most people interpret it, but that doesn't really make sense with the context, because he's saying that he's going to remain in that state until God pleads his cause and executes judgment. So he's going to be fallen and sitting in darkness, but the Lord will be a light to him while he's in the darkness until judgment day, until judgment is executed. That's the idea. That's what's being taught here. And we have the same imagery in verse 10 as we have in Psalm 112, 9-10, which talks about, in verse 2, it talks about the generation of the righteous inheriting the land. And then in verses 9-10, the unrighteous, they melt away, and they weep and gnash as they weep and gnash their teeth as they witness the righteous receiving their reward. And so here we have the unrighteous witnessing the righteous receive their inheritance as they're being destroyed. Mm-hmm. And so it's after judgment day, after they're judged, that's when this happens. So like Jesus said, after we're judged, that's when we'll inherit the kingdom prepared for us. And then that's when the ungodly will be destroyed in the lake of fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So here we have in Micah a clear verse where Micah prophesied that after he dies, he's going to be in the darkness, but there's in the light in the darkness. So that's the same concept we had in God's description of the shadow of death, where there's a place of darkness and a place of light. The place of darkness is where the wicked go. The place of light is where the righteous go as they await judgment day.
Okay, we got the parable pulled back up.
Okay, so what we just read there in Micah 7, 8-10 is a clear contrast of what the ungodly will experience while they're in the darkness of the shadow of death. So as we described in our first response video, the Bible makes it clear that the ungodly who have died are currently being punished in a comparable way as fallen angels. So 2 Peter 2:9, verse 17, Jude 12-13, those verses describe the ungodly being punished in darkness, gloomy darkness, as they await judgment day. And then 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 6 describes angels being in darkness, gloomy darkness, as they await judgment day, bound. And also Isaiah 24:21-22 describes both the ungodly and angels bound in the pit. In the Greek, that's the pit. That's where the ungodly go, the darkness, the place of darkness within the realm of the dead. So yeah, and so that's.
So I also wanted to point out too, we've been pointing out this theme of like those who worship idols, they become like the idols they worship. I want to point out this theme also with the end of the parable here. So when he says they have Abraham, he said, if they don't hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone raises from the dead. Notice how there's that word hear, right? So if they don't have ears to hear, then they're not going to repent no matter what. They have to have ears to hear. If they are following idols, then they're going to be deaf to the message. And I just think that's important to point out. He's speaking to the one who is the rich man, right? He's not speaking to Lazarus here. He's speaking to the one who gave himself to idols and, pursued riches and luxury and didn't help the poor and was selfish. And that's idolatry. And so, because of that, he didn't have ears to hear the Moses and the prophets. And so he's saying, if your family doesn't have ears to hear them either, then even if someone raises from the dead, they're going to be doomed. So I just wanted to point that out as well, that this theme of people that worship idols become like their idols is in this parable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good. But yeah, so we have parallels within the Old Testament that describe this concept of there being two places within the intermediate state where the righteous go and the unrighteous go. So we have ways to show that we're not just interpreting this parable literal and then interpreting things elsewhere. Like, we're starting outside of the parable with Jesus's didactic teachings, with the apostles' didactic teachings, and then as we read the parable, we realize, oh, it's Jesus is referencing these Old Testament themes, and we go back to and we look at these Old Testament themes, and we see this idea that within the shadow of death, there's the realm of the dead. There's this idea of there's a place of light and a place of darkness. And so, yeah, because today there's this idea. Okay, if Chris and James could have gone back in time and talked to me before I started writing my book, and they presented me their views, and then on top of that, they sent me this YouTube video that I watched recently that was trying to refute the verses they use. It affirms consciousness after we die, but he believes we go straight to heaven. But if they gave their argument, and then they're like, okay, so these are the arguments against our verses. He did such a terrible job because he was basically saying that the Bible was wrong. And so if they gave me their argument and then showed me the argument against their verses, I'd be like, okay, I believe in soul sleep. Because if you put me in a position where I have to choose between a doctrine and choosing whether or not the Bible is wrong, I'm gonna choose the doctrine where I don't have to say, oh, the Bible's wrong. And so they would have won me over. And so it's because I had a paradigm. It had to be one of these two. It had to be either we go straight to heaven or it's soul sleep. And so if I were put in that paradigm, it has to be one of the two. And again, if Chris and James gave me their arguments, and then I heard the arguments against them from a person who believes we go straight to heaven, I would probably believe in soul sleep. And so I think that's what I'm trying to say here is all throughout Christianity, it's pretty much been those two arguments. It's been because ever since 400, whenever Jerome wrote the Vulgate, that's when we kind of lost the distinction between Hades and Gehenna. And I wish I had these quotes pulled up, but we have quotes from the Westminster Confession of Faith where it uses rhetoric like, for Scripture offers no other place for a soul to go other than heaven or hell. Therefore, when a person dies, that's where they go. And then William Tyndale, he didn't believe, he was more aligned with Chris and James. I believe he believed the souls were immortal, though. I believe he believed in psychopanachia, but so he wouldn't have been a physicalist, but he used a similar rhetoric. So the Bible offers no other place to go for souls other than heaven or hell, but we don't go there till Judgment Day. Therefore, souls are unconscious after they die. And so you have the same rhetoric. The Bible, if we're sticking to the Bible, it's one of those two places. And so you either go there immediately when you die or Judgment Day. And so that it's because the intermediate state was eliminated from the Bible. So if you eliminate the intermediate state, then yeah, there is only one or two places, either heaven or hell. And so what we're trying to get back to is what the Bible originally, how the Holy Spirit inspired the apostles, is that there is a distinction between Hades and Gehenna. Right now, there is the unrighteous and the righteous. They're in Hades. And so that is where the souls go after they die. And then after we're judged, that's when we go into the eternal state. That's when the righteous inherit the kingdom, and it's when the unrighteous are destroyed along with this earth and along with Satan and his fallen angels.
As brilliant as Augustine and Jerome were, it's amazing how many errors go back to those two.
Yeah. Because he
modern theology.
Augustine believed we go straight to heaven when we die, and so you have Augustine and Jerome in the 400. So that's essentially why from 400 on, like you can't really find our view. But when you go before them, like it's all over the place.
Yeah, a lot of people held our view before Jerome and Augustine, which is I think it's pretty telling too, but I don't know of anyone that held Chris and James's view before. Like I genuinely know zero people, maybe one or two, but like I'm unaware of any fathers that held their view.
Not physicalism, like so Tatian, Athenagoras, and Felix something another, that they all affirmed soul sleep. So they would have been psychopanacheists or whatever, because they believed the soul was immortal. So they believed ECT. So that still wouldn't. It still is a different view of the intermediate state than. And when you think about it, it's actually more consistent. I used to kind of give Adam a hard time about this because I was like, your view is like, I never heard your view before, but actually his view is the original view of soul sleep. I'm just so used to the physicalist view.
So Adam's view, just for our viewers' sake, because we both know Adam privately, but maybe our viewers don't. So for the people watching this, our friend Adam from over at Curious Christianity, he holds that we have a soul, but he's leans more towards soul sleep. He doesn't actually, I've talked to him recently, he doesn't actually care if there's consciousness or unconsciousness in the afterlife, but he kind of leans more towards soul sleep. The view that he holds is different than Chris and James. He believes there's a soul, but it's just not conscious. It doesn't experience anything. So that's the original soul sleep view. So Adam is like more consistent with what the original soul sleepers believed than Chris and James are.
Yeah, because in the early centuries of Christianity, it was either you had the Sadducees, so like they're the closest you can get to the physicalist, and so with them, there was no spiritual realm. That's the whole idea. Like if the soul sleeps, if the soul survives past the body, then that's dualism. And so Sadducees obviously denied dualism. And then you have the Epicureans. They also denied, the spiritual realm and all that kind of stuff. And so the idea was it has to be one of those two things. It's either in that Epicureanism, there's no angels. You can't have angels. You can't have ethereal beings. And so that's the whole idea behind it, is if you have angels, like how do you make angels work in a physicalist perspective? Because the things
I think Chris just holds to anthropological physicalism. So I think he would hold that there are immaterial things. It's just humans that are physical. So I think for him, like, because obviously God is immaterial. Like Chris wouldn't say that God is material. So I think the distinction Chris would want to make is just humans are physical entities. But obviously there are angels, and God is immaterial. That's what I've heard him say in the past.
Okay. Yeah. See, that view it didn't exist in the first, at least I can't find any existence of it, because the Sadducees would have denied that, the Epicureans would have denied it, and they were the only non-dualist views that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are probably others, but as far as I know, that those are the only two, and they would have disagreed with Chris on that.
I think and I think this is a really important point to stress for those still watching, because whenever we talk about what the apostles taught in the New Testament, they were clearly, like we saw in Lazarus and the rich man, that parable, Jesus is making very clear dualist distinctions there. He's saying they're buried and then they're having this conscious experience in Hades, right? And so the earliest followers of Jesus, kind of followed in this way of thinking, because that was the common view at the time. And again, this is why our extra biblical stuff was important, because we were trying to show and demonstrate, hey, this is what people believed. This is what the Pharisees believed. This was the audience. This is what the average person believed. We see that through archaeology and funerary practices and all that stuff. That's what all that was for, was to show. I feel like this is a full circle moment. It's like, look, this is what they believed, and even those that followed Jesus. So all that is before. So like you got the Old Testament and ancient Israelite context with what the Old Testament says, plus what archaeology and all that says. And then you move forward to the New Testament. You see all of this teaching that we're pointing out. And then after Jesus, you see the earliest followers, and none of them held Chris and James's view. And so it's like, where is their view at this time? And I think for them to have won the debate, they need to show that people understood these things the way that they did, because it's like, it seems like Jesus didn't understand anthropological physicalism to be the case. He had this dualist distinction. Doesn't seem like Peter or Jude held this belief. It doesn't seem like any of the ancient Israelites held this belief. It doesn't seem like any of the early church held this belief. So like, it just seems like a novel view that comes from a subjective interpretation of poetry and wisdom literature.
Yeah. Our view is consistent, throughout.
It wasn't until errors from Jerome and Augustine come in that are, and again, those guys are brilliant. They have a lot of great stuff to say. I think Jerome has very important ecclesiological comments about the church that kind of help Protestants out, like with the development of the priesthood and things like that. You've got, I think Augustine has some good things to say on science and being open-minded to those things, right? Like, I'm not saying these guys are like bad or anything, but there are a lot of errors that go back to them. And so when it comes to Jerome, he translated the Vulgate, and that removes the distinction between Gehenna and Hades and all these different things, right? And so because of that, you just have one Latin word. And so people who are reading the Vulgate, they are under the impression that there's only two destinations. There's only heaven or hell. And so there you go. That's where all this stuff comes from. And so if you get out of the Latinization of the scriptures and just read the Greek and the Hebrew, you'll see very clearly that there is a third destination. There is a third option. It's not heaven or hell, and that's it. So, and that's where our view comes in. So, you have anything else to say, Steve? Before we,
another thing about Jerome, I blame him for King James Version onlyism, because a lot of the change differences between the King James Version and later versions is later versions aren't really reliant on the Vulgate as much as the King James Version was. And so you have all these differences, and what, I can't remember the verse, but it's when it's in Daniel where he says, Nebuchadnezzar says, it's a son of the gods or something, like, I think, referring to the fourth man in with them in the fire. And so Jerome changed that to he's a son of God. the son of God, or something like that. And that's not what Nebuchadnezzar would have said. But he was trying to use it, like make it a theological point, and sure, yeah, that preaches well, but it's not true to Nebuchadnezzar. It's not true to the actual historical account. It's not true to what the Holy Spirit actually inspired. And so that's one of the verses that King James Version only people use. Like, see, your version is pagan, because it makes Jesus a God or a son of God or something. And so it's like, well, no, like Nebuchadnezzar.
In one of our responses earlier, I showed a clip from Dr. Mark Ward on the King James Version with his False Friends playlist. Well, just watch his whole channel. I think, debunks King James onlyism very well. There's so many reasons to not be a King James onlyist. I think one of the most compelling ones is like the preface of the King James Version. They literally say, like, there are going to be other translations. Like, we hope that this is a good contribution. Like, even the people who translated the King James Version didn't think of it as like, this is the only translation. But I agree with you. The manuscript tradition of the Textus Receptus is, it needs to be updated, right? We have better manuscripts since the 1600s and 1700s. So like, there's just no reason to, stick to the original King James only, or the King James Version. It's a good translation. I don't think it's a bad translation. Has a lot of good we use the King James Version in this response for one of our verses because it translates something a little bit better. So,
because in that instance, and there's a few others where I believe the King James Version is actually more accurate than most of the other versions. And it's not me being biased or whatever. It's like, even when you go back to the Hebrew or the Greek, it's actually is more accurate.
Yeah, and it is a good translation. I would probably put it in the top 10 easy. Like, I don't think it's a bad translation. I like a lot of translations, by the way. So top 10 for me is high praise. So I pretty much consult. I don't know about you. I consult 5 or 6, 7 translations like all the time. I love NET, NASB, ESV, NIV, the LSB, the NLT. For the Psalms and Proverbs, I think the NLT is the best one. KJV and KJV. I consult multiple translations. CSB. Yeah. So I think everyone should do that, by the way. It's a good practice.
Yeah.
Because you'll, especially for, like I said, I think the NLT, it gets a lot of flack because it's like written on an 8th grade reading level. So like they change a lot of the language. But honestly, for the Psalms and Proverbs and poetry, the NLT is excellent. I think it communicates the message much better, like the meaning of the idioms and things like that, much better than others, for the most part. Obviously, it's not perfect, but I would say like 9 times out of 10, the NLT does a great job at translating those things.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I didn't expect us to start talking about translations and stuff, but hey, that's fun. For those of you that are theology nerds like us, I'm sure that's interesting. If people are still watching, then they're the nerds like us, and welcome to being a theology nerd. So, do you have any other comments on the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, or anything else before we sign off from this one?
No, I feel like we did a fairly good job of going through it. I mean, I know I rambled here and there, but yeah, like it's. I think as long as you stick to those rules, like it makes it very hard to refute, because like the rules are designed to take away bias, to take away our subjective, what we go into the text, what we bring to the text. It's the rules are designed to take that out of the equation. And so if we have this uniform approach to every scripture, then it makes it harder to incorporate our subjective views. And then when we do incorporate our subjective views, then it becomes apparent using those rules.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Let us know in the comments how we did. And thank you guys for watching. And if you haven't checked out our other responses, we've done like, I don't know, this is what, 7 or 8 now at this point?
Yeah,
something like 7. That. This is 7. Okay, so I was right on. There we go. Go check out the other ones. Also, if you want to watch the original debate, it's on Trinity Radio. I'll put the link in the description below. If you're watching on Steve's channel, come hang out with me. If you're watching on my channel, go check out Steve's channel. I'll also put a link in the description. Do all the YouTube stuff, like, share, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
God bless.